I used to build briefings that went as high as POTUS level on advising policymakers on emerging electronic warfare trends. So I know a thing or two about defensive weapon systems, specifically as they relate to electronic warfare. And that's the lens I took to describe Bitcoin. To me, it clicked. The whole idea of proof of work, the whole idea of hashing, the whole idea of defending our property rights by imposing a prohibitive cost on attackers clicked just easily, effortlessly for me, because that is what we build in the military.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Bitcoin is Hard. This is a Choice App production about the intersection of Bitcoin and personal finance. I'm your host, Brian Harrington, and we have Jason Lowery with us today, who has done a bunch of Bitcoin podcasts, and we're super thankful to have you. For the audience background, Jason and I got connected through some solar Bitcoin mining that I'm doing at my house. And so it lined up pretty well with a project that he's working on at MIT. And so I want to cover kind of the general stuff that Jason's brain is working on in regards to Bitcoin, and then weave it into the personal finance stuff and the home mining stuff. The personal finance stuff that we normally cover here, and the home mining stuff that I've been thinking about. So those are the three things we're going to expertly weave together right now. And Jason, what better way to do it than we're going to throw up a tweet on the screen. Bogdan's going to put it up on the screen after the fact of this image that you know very well, which is your drawing of this chart. Jason, can you explain this chart to us?
First of all, you're only giving me 45 minutes to talk about all this stuff. This is going to be hard. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, I guess important background for just me in general. I'm an astronautical engineer in the Space Force. I'm a Space Force officer, and my job in the Space Force is to help design weapon systems. So I know a thing or two about how to engineer systems to help defend things. And so when I started studying Bitcoin, that's the perspective I took. I viewed it as through the lens of a defense system engineer. And when I started going online, and especially recently when I started interfacing with people on Twitter, I noticed a lot of incongruencies between what they were saying and especially with the ESG stuff, the ESG accusations that Bitcoin uses too much power and that the energy it uses to defend its underlying property is somehow bad. It was just an incongruent analogy. Didn't make any sense. It was obvious from the people who criticized this technology that they have actually no idea how it works or what its energy is used for. And I got frustrated with that. And so I just decided to start trying to come up with ways that I could clear that up. And this is all part of my overarching thesis, which I'm doing here at MIT, on how to form a way to describe Bitcoin in which it's super easy for policymakers to make informed decisions on it without having to have 2 or 3 years worth of time studying Bitcoin, right? And so part of that grounded theory thesis is coming up with new ways of conceptualizing this complex socio-technical software/hardware system for property defense called Bitcoin, and forming concepts that can actually make sense to people quickly and intuitively. And I started experimenting. I use actually my Twitter as part of my thesis methodology. So my shit posting on Twitter is actually going to be written up in the methodology part of my thesis. And because the way grounded theory works is you read stuff, you study, you overanalyze every single word that you see, and I'm going through everything that Satoshi ever wrote. And then you form what's called core conceptualizations off of those things. And then you test those core conceptualizations for their empirical validity, which really just means you get a sanity check on what you're saying. So that's all a long-winded way of saying that I've just been posting as many different core conceptualizations as I can to Twitter to see which ones resonate with people the most, which ones make the most sense. And I use different techniques. Sometimes I'll write something, sometimes I'll do a poll, sometimes I'll draw a picture. And for whatever reason, this picture that I drew in class as just one of dozens of other pictures and conceptualizations that I've been writing as part of the methodology for forming this grounded theory on my thesis, that one just landed instantly. I stepped away for an hour and I went back and it was already trending. And so what this picture shows is just a different way of conceptualizing Bitcoin and comparing it to other properties. And I think the clear way to describe Bitcoin to no coiners is to frame it as a defense system. It's not really the property that makes Bitcoin special, because anybody can make a digital asset. That's not hard. I could make an NFT of this exact picture and post it on multiple different websites and try to collect money off people. Forming digital assets is not special. What makes Bitcoin special is the control structure that it imposes over the digital asset to ensure zero trust and egalitarian control. Or another way of saying it is to defend the digital property, to defend our individual rights to a piece of this digital property pie. And if you frame Bitcoin in this lens as a defense system rather than just a digital property, then the accurate apples to apples comparison is to compare the Bitcoin defense system to other types of property defense systems. And that's something that me, as the military guy, knows very well. I understand, and a lot of people understand, that our property, our house that we live in, the land that we're on, the laws that we enjoy, the ways of life that we enjoy, and the contracts that are enforced by those laws only exist insofar as we have formed what is effectively defense systems, power projection systems to protect that property. So in a nutshell, your house wouldn't exist if it weren't for the American military. The land that you claim to live on, that you claim to own, wouldn't be yours if it weren't for the fact that a bunch of Europeans came and colonized this land. And the laws that exist insofar as we can defend those laws against other belligerents around the world. That's like the precursor. So the militaries and the defense systems that exist, those all exist before we even have anything else, to like even any property rights that we know of. And so the beginning of that graph is simply reminding people of that. Your property, your equities, your gold, your commodities like oil, your housing, the state and chain of custody of all those things was written in blood to include the rule, and they're defended by people who bleed, and also rules of law. And those rules of law only exist insofar as the people who put their lives on the line to create those rule of law. So I live in Boston, and I'm just a short walk, less than a 10-minute walk, to a graveyard where you can actually see the graves of the people who died in the Battle of Boston during the Revolutionary War. Like, that's the energy bill, that's the power bill that was paid to create our equities, our land, our housing. And so what Bitcoin does is it just takes this exact same game where we create systems to defend our property, but maintain zero trust and egalitarian control of our property, and also maintain the ability to project power, to defend our property rights, and to countervail oppressors if they emerge. It takes that exact system, but it just replicates it in the digital domain, in the cyber domain. So if you have physical property, you need kinetic power projection to establish a control structure over it. But if you use digital property, then you can use electric power projection to establish a zero trust and egalitarian control structure over it. And if you frame it this way, then the ESG argument against Bitcoin totally evaporates, because it is obviously better if we demonetize the things that people have to die to defend and monetize the thing that people just have to pay a electricity bill to defend, right? So you have to pay a power projection bill. You have to pay a power bill somehow. Do you pay it with human lives, or do you pay it with electricity? And by creating this digital property and monetizing this digital property, we've effectively created for the first time a what is effectively a non-lethal form of warfare.
Yeah. Okay. So right off of that, this is where I want to then pull in the personal finance piece and pull in the at-home mining renewable piece off solar. When because of that, like that story that you're able to like piece together and tell so well based on your experience and that it's connecting with so many people, what I walk away from that with is just further conviction that I'm investing in the right thing, and the money that I'm choosing to hold is it's both like doing something for me personally, but it's also doing something for the world. Like we're Bitcoin holders are physically investing in peace. They're physically investing in peace. And what I like about from a I've said this on the podcast before, and I've said it on Bitcoin. Like, it's very hard for me to separate the like financial aspect of like Bitcoin with also the like community activist aspect of Bitcoin. Like, both of it is flooding through my brain, like at all times. And that's where, so when people say, like, why is it so volatile, or like, why is the price down, or like that kind of stuff, it's like, I'm happy to like talk about that, but I'm also like so wanting to share this whole other thing that like you say it with your words, and like other people say it with their words, and you just have this huge story that's there. But so when you're this image and this story is connecting with people, and the truth of this is connecting with people, and I just feel like my personal finances, like my energy of my house and the energy of like me waking up every day is all aligned in something that's benefiting the world through like pressing forward peace and benefiting me personally. And so we use the word like, but we use the like battery analogy a lot too for like different things. But I just like I feel like a battery, and I feel like I'm using anything and everything I have in like one line that's all aligned just again towards something that's beneficial for me, something that's beneficial for my family, and something that's beneficial like for the globe.
Yeah, so when it comes to people like you who run your miner at home, I very much see that as a Second Amendment right to bear arms. You're defending your private property. So it reminds me of who was the admiral from Japan during World War II? I think it was Admiral Yamamoto. He basically said you can't invade the United States because there would be a rifle behind every blade of grass. So if we unpack that a little bit, he's saying that every single American can is willing to project power to defend their property rights. And and so now you consider what mining is. Mining shouldn't have been called mining. That was an incongruent analogy. And I'll have an entire chapter dedicated to that in my thesis. Hashing is first and foremost a defense system. And and so that you're when you say that you're choosing to run your hashing device at home, that is equivalent to when I choose to keep a gun at my house, right? If anyone tries to come in and take my property or denial of service attack me from my property, deny my access to my property, I am going to project kinetic power against them. They get one warning shot and the next one goes not over their shoulder.
Mm.
So, but the problem with that is obviously it's a bloody power projection game because it's kinetic. And you can't really get around that insofar as you choose to monetize physical assets. But if we monetize electric assets, or if we more specifically, if we monetize digital assets, you can do that same thing, but now it's non-lethal. You can project power non-lethally. So when you run your hashing device at your home, you're effectively keeping a rifle at your house that you're using to defend your private property. And if everyone does that, if everyone keeps a hashing computer behind every blade of grass, then other countries will have a pretty difficult time trying to denial of service attack this network, or the users who use this network. And so to wrap it all up, your right to bear arms really is just your right to defend your property, whether it be your life or if you have gold in your house or something like that. But
Right.
but the end state, consider the emergent properties of that game. In the kinetic power projection game, as you scale that up and as people use that game, you get dead people, you get rubble, you get wreckage, and you get humans developing awful weapons of war at scale. But if you repeat that same game in the digital domain, you don't get that. You get abundant energy for everyone, because everyone's doing exactly what you're doing and putting solar photovoltaic systems on their house to run their miner. You get cheap, abundant energy and infrastructure for everyone. You get private property rights to the max for everybody. And you, more importantly, you demonetize the spoils of legacy war. So if you demonetize land, there's a lot less return on investment of invading land, for example.
Mm-hmm. Another way, we're increasing efficiencies. Like, we're increasing the efficiency of anything and everything that there is. And we're like that's when I look at the top part of this chart, and when I think about fiat money, I just think about all of and when you talk about the collateral damage, like the collateral damage of playing the power projection game around these assets being monetized, all of that could have been productive. All of that could have been energy. All of the energy used to play the power projection game could have been put into productive infrastructure that would raise the overall tide of all of humanity. And so humanity is trying to fill a bathtub that has a hole in it. We're plugging the hole and we're moving on together. And that's why, yeah, I'm just in having all of my personal finances aligned with this, having where I live aligned with this, having what I work on every day and the currency that I paid in aligned with this, is I'm experiencing what it's like to live without inefficiencies, or I'm moving there. I'm moving towards that. And the fact that you can just kind of already feel it is amazing. How quickly it can actually turn in your life.
Yeah, once you see it like this, it's really hard to tolerate arguments about Bitcoin uses too much energy, because the apples to apples comparison is to compare the energy that Bitcoin uses to the energy that is spilt to defend legacy property. And when I say spilt, I literally am referring to the energy lost in the bloodshed of the dead people that defended our underlying property rights or our underlying rules of law. I would caution you, though, about the efficiency part, because yes, it is true. If you compare the amount of watts that all militaries have ever expended to defend property to the watts that we use to defend Bitcoin, for example, yeah, obviously Bitcoin uses way less. It's unquestionably much more efficient. But the problem there is people start to think that efficiency is what matters. And while I agree it's definitely better, we just have to make sure that we're cautious about putting efficiency on a pedestal, because technically the most energy efficient way to defend property is to trust your neighbor. So the most, right, so for example, when we build a military, the military is often accused of being wasteful, because we build this huge military, we engage in these super expensive exercises, we train constantly, and then we never go to, or we might not ever go to battle, and people see that as inefficient. But that's not inefficient, because the fact that we aren't invaded is proof that that energy wasn't wasted, just like the fact that Bitcoin or users of Bitcoin haven't experienced denial of service attacks is proof that that energy wasn't wasted. And so you actually want to increase that energy as much as possible to maximize your security. And so it's just something you have to be careful about.
No, and that's the perfect pivot to the surplus. That's because what are people pointing out? They're pointing
Exactly.
out the surplus of the surplus of the kinetic energy is what is protecting like the things. And so people are looking for ways to more efficiently like use their surplus. And so completely agree. Completely agree like and that's why demonizing energy use of any kind that you don't understand leads you down the rabbit hole like of the just talking where you're not like fully ingrained yet. But so pivoting to exactly a small example of that, what we're researching and like finding out is that there's these great panels that are going on my roof that are creating energy for free. Like I already paid the upfront cost for the panels. These panels are creating 14 to 18 kilowatt hours of energy per day. My home is using 10 to 12 kilowatt hours a day of energy, and so I have a surplus of energy, and the world doesn't know what to do with it. The current infrastructure doesn't know what to do with it. So they say, I'll give you 3.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Bitcoiners completely understand immediately. Anyone watching this that hasn't even ever run a miner has listened to enough Bitcoin podcasts to know that doesn't sound right. Like that should probably pay higher than that. Like, so they immediately understand that. And now, me as an individual, I'm able to direct my surplus better. Like I'm able to absorb it instead of letting it just leak over and not be productive. And when all of society does this as a whole, we're all redirecting our surplus towards something positive for humanity. And if we're all redirecting our surplus towards Bitcoin, we're literally all redirecting our surplus energy towards peace.
Towards the security and private property rights of all individuals. So it's not even because there's 2 points. First of all, if you're running surplus electricity like solar photovoltaic electricity to run a miner, that's obviously carbon neutral because it's solar. So no one should be complaining about a miner that's being run or an ASIC that's being run off of surplus energy. The reason why you don't get a lot of money back for your surplus energy is because often grids are kind of overwhelmed with the amount of solar photovoltaics that they're getting towards the day, and it's just kind of it increases operational complexity for the grid in general. So there's not really like not a lot of people in the grid company are going to be happy or like super enthusiastic about anyone in the residential community that's just adding more solar to their houses and
Mm-hmm.
putting it back into the grid, because that's increased complexity for them.
And
But
that's all, and you're also illustrating then friction between what's this is classic issues. Like it's their policymakers are saying do this, do this, do this, do this, and then the realities of the current infrastructure is saying, hey, here's a bottleneck, hey, here's a bottleneck, hey, here's a bottleneck, and they're talking past each other, and the homeowner is sitting here in the middle just like trying to do their pencil math on paper of like, wait, what is it you guys want me to do?
yeah, it creates increased complexity on you. But enter Bitcoin. Now you can take, to your point, all your excess electricity and use that to defend private property for everyone in the world. So when you take your excess solar photovoltaic energy to run your miner, you're increasing the private property rights of someone on the other side of the world who may or may not have an oppressive government that might try to denial of service attack them access to private property. And so if everyone in the world starts using their surplus energy to increase the security of Bitcoin, that is a net positive for everybody in 2 ways. Not only do you increase private property rights for everyone because you're increasing the amount of hash behind the defense of the underlying property of Bitcoin, but you're also making energy cheaper, making it cheaper to build renewable infrastructure, and increasing the industry as a whole, increasing the economies of scale. So,
And when we
like,
lower that, we create more surplus, more surplus for other people. Like they are not then having to pay as high bills, or like, which then leads to something else positive in their life. It's like a great cycle.
yeah, you get paid to put up greener energy sources and be more independent. while simultaneously benefiting the private property rights of everyone in the world. They're mutually reinforcing feedback cycles. And so this is what's been driving, I think, Bitcoin really well. I just don't think people fully understand it. They don't get it. They get confused, and they might see Bitcoin as strictly a property, or they might see Bitcoin as strictly, quote, monetized energy. But that's not inaccurate. We can use different types of abstractions to describe Bitcoin. But like, what is also not inaccurate is to say that you are literally building a defense system. Like, you literally have created a machine whose job is to project power to make it too cost prohibitive to try to attack you. And so that is a defense system. That is a weapon system. That's what I do. And by the way, you're doing it non-lethally, which is what I do too, because the satellite systems that we're building to fight wars that may extend into orbit are also going to be human out of the loop. They're also going to be non-lethal. They're still going to be kinetic, maybe, but do you see what I
Mhm.
mean there? And so I think it's really powerful for people to understand the security implications of Bitcoin, not the. I mean, there's no shortage of different financial and economic experts who can come on here to talk about that part, but how much are people actually thinking about private property rights security and their own individual sovereignty and how they
Yeah.
contribute to that with their own electricity? And so if I can tell that to you and you can understand it, then I think this is especially in America, this is a story that will resonate with people really well. And most importantly, for my mission, that's a story that my peers and bosses at the Pentagon are going to understand, especially when we start talking about how do we maximize sovereignty and sovereign level wealth preservation and reducing the attack surfaces on our treasuries.
Hmm. I think, what do you make of, like, the purpose of the second the perp I like the analogy to the Second Amendment. The purpose of the Second Amendment was to, like, decentralize the power projection game, like to get everyone involved. Everyone is involved rather than a central point.
Yep.
And that's another, like, Bitcoin is repopularizing that, like getting everyone involved. Um, what do you think? What else about that?
Yeah, you nailed it. Our founding fathers knew that decentralization was a key part of security. They knew that if they gave all the power projection capability to strictly the government, the centralized government, then that the government could abuse that power projection capability to denial of service attack the citizens. And
Mhm.
so the founding fathers knew this well, and the Second Amendment was designed to decentralize power projections, to minimize what is effectively a 51% attack of people's private property within the country. So they knew this
Do,
clearly.
yeah. Okay. Off of that, I have no idea how you'll answer it. What do you feel? Do you feel like, I don't know anywhere else to ask it. Do you feel like the federal government is too powerful? Like, do you feel like it's too centralized right now?
So I guess that to answer that, we have to zoom out
Mhm.
and we have to look at the world as a whole. Okay, so let's consider all of the land on Earth. We have what? How many countries are there? 195 different countries, 195 different power projectors, sovereign countries with their own militaries who
Mhm.
project power to preserve zero trust and egalitarian control over their corner of the world. So the first thing I would say is if you're an alien and you're looking down at the earth to try to understand if it's decentralized or centralized, you would probably conclude that no single pool of sapiens has over 51% control over the underlying property of land.
Mhm.
The United States doesn't control over half of the land. The China doesn't control over half of the land. Russia doesn't control over half of the land. So even the top power projectors on the world, they only, at the macro scale, decentralization still exists. No single power projector. There's like 9 countries with nuclear weapons. Like no single power projector can have full control over the underlying property of the world, and therefore can't
Yep.
denial service attack the underlying physical property of the world. So then you zoom down. Okay, then you say, okay, within each country, what does it look like, and how are they structured? And that's where things get interesting, because the federal government, at least in the United States, still has some checks and balances, and we have states, and the states have some rights. And you could tell from the very beginning that we tried to kind of find that balance. But then if you compare that to like China, I would argue that China has much more centralized control over their population than the United States. I would
Mm-hmm.
argue Russia does too. So I guess that's just something to point out. And then the last thing to point out when we consider this conversation is we have to recognize the tension. There's a fundamental tension that Bitcoin solves, but physical property projection doesn't. And that's this problem. If you want to defend your property, you've got 3 options. You can trust your neighbor. That's the most efficient option. And just shake his hand and just trust that he won't go back on his deal not to take your stuff. You can defend it yourself, or you can hire people to defend it for you. Defending it yourself is hard because you're only one person. And so if their neighbor decides to raise an army of 10,000 people to invade you, you're not going to be very effective at defending your property. Also, you're busy. You're doing your own stuff. Everyone
Mm-hmm.
doesn't, like, if you had if everyone was a soldier, it wouldn't be a very productive economy. So you've got to specialize in whatever you're specialized in, and then you got to hire the soldiers to defend your thing. The problem is that tension is, yeah, you can hire a third party to defend your property, but you still have to trust them not to denial of service attack you with the power projection that you're paying them for. So
Yep.
and then there's a tension because the larger the military, the more defense, but also the more vulnerable you become to denial of service attack of your military. Does that make sense? There's a tension there. You need to pay for power projectors to defend you, but as that grows, you become more and more vulnerable to denial of service attack from that entity, and they could turn
Yeah.
on you.
You're writing and researching and articulating like a new idea, right? A solution. Like here, we're writing a paper about a solution, okay? And this solution will be presented to humans that are in leadership positions. What is the end game, Jason, like of this paper? And what are you expecting the reaction to be like from leadership?
The end game of this paper is to make sure that policymakers don't make any stupid decisions that set this country back by 1,000 years.
Mhm.
When you frame Bitcoin as a property or a monetary system, you may be fooled into believing that the United States has the option to ignore this technology or to ban this technology or to do anything but embrace it wholeheartedly. When you frame Bitcoin as a weapon system, as a defense system, then you realize that while we may be able to vote not to allow this technology in the United States, we don't get to vote to let our adversaries use this technology against us or to their advantage and win the next 1,000 years once they figure out what we've figured out, which is that Bitcoin is the future of property defense. And so if you look at the Schelling points that have existed, anytime a new defense technology has emerged, the answer is always you acquire that technology ASAP, you buy whatever you can, and you use it before your enemy uses it against you. So, for example, when the cannon was invented, the engineer that invented the cannon went to Constantinople and offered to build it for the emperor. The emperor turned him down. A year later, the emperor is dead. The walls of Constantinople are being shot down by those cannons that now belong to a 19-year-old kid named Sultan Mahmud from the Ottoman Empire. Or when Mr. Whitehead goes up to the Royal Navy and says, I invented this new defense technology called torpedoes. You should probably invest in this technology. What does the Royal Navy do? They say, no, that's a threat to our naval hegemony. Okay, that's fine. You can ban torpedoes, but you can't ban Germany from building torpedoes. And suddenly you realize, oh yeah, you need to get in the torpedo game now. So if a new defense system, if a new property defense technology emerges, the answer is you better take it seriously and you better posture your nation to be in the lead of this new paradigm. It doesn't matter if this torpedo is a threat to your Navy. It doesn't matter if you think Bitcoin is a threat to the United States hegemony. You don't have the option to not have other countries. What matters is what Haiti decides. What matters is what another country decides to adopt as their primary property power projection defense system. And if they all decide to use it, then and we just sit back and do nothing or try or worse ban our access to it, then we put ourselves at a disproportionate and asymmetric disadvantage.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so amazing. What the question we try to ask every guest and is, what is a Bitcoin product or service that doesn't exist yet that you would use or wish was a thing?
This is it would be a service. So I guess this deserves some clarification up front. This is going to be a controversial statement. Remember, I'm a military officer and I'm trying to make sure that our country understands the national strategic security implications of this technology, believing in my brain that this is the future of property defense for all nations for hundreds of years. And so the service that I wish would happen is that the United States Strategic Command, a combatant command, would form a combined hash force component command whose sole job it would be to defend all American hashing companies or the American hashing industry. And maybe you even make that a multinational component command where we actually pair with our Five Eye partners or whoever to make sure that we are defending our hash industry against cyber attacks or even kinetic attacks, or if someone tries to go after their power infrastructure or their internet infrastructure.
Love it. That's amazing. Tell us your Twitter so that everyone listening can participate in the research.
Yeah, so my Twitter is at Jason P. Lowery, Lowery. And like I said before, I'm trying to be as transparent as possible with everything I'm doing. I constantly post snippets from my thesis. I try to ask for public opinions on it and feedback. And so if you want to be part of that, or if you just want to watch me making stupid posts, then be sure to follow me.
Love it. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. We'll see you on the next one.
Hey all, this is Brian. You can reach me on Twitter at Brain Harrington. Shoot me a DM with any feedback from today's episode. This has been a Choice App production. Bitcoin is becoming centric to personal finance, and we want to help you learn how to better engage with Bitcoin financial services. None of this is financial advice and is for education and entertainment only.